She laughed before she even walked through the door. That was the part Mason Callaway would remember longest, not what was said inside, not the word that came later in the parking lot, the one with the particular edge of someone who considers themselves to be doing a person a courtesy by acknowledging them at all. It was the laugh, soft and polished, and just loud enough to reach the people standing closest. The kind of sound designed to establish, before a single conversation began, exactly where everyone stood in relation to each other. Victoria Crane, CEO of Meridian Auto Group, the third largest vehicle parts distributor in the country, stepped out of a black SUV, looked at the sign above the entrance, Callaway Fabrication and Supply, and laughed. She did not know that Mason held 6 patents. She did not know that 2 of them were running inside Meridian's own distribution centers at that exact moment, processing inventory routing with a precision that their original automation firm had charged 4 times what Mason's licensing agreement cost. She did not know any of that. She walked through his door still smiling. Mason was at the workbench when the bell above the entrance rang. He set down the calibration tool he was holding, wiped his hands on a cloth, and looked up at the group that came through. 3 people. Victoria in the center, her operations director on her left, her assistant on her right, all of them in clothes that cost more than the lathe in Mason's back room. His shop was narrow and ordered. Every tool on the pegboard wall hung in its marked position. The floor was swept. The active job, a custom differential housing for a regional fleet contractor, sat open on the primary bench. In the corner near the window, where the morning light came through in a clean flat angle, sat a small stuffed dog named Gearhead, faded orange, missing 1 button eye. It belonged to his daughter Nadia, who was 7 years old, and left it on the bench each morning when Mason dropped her at school, because she had decided it kept the shop safe while she was gone. Victoria looked at the dog. Something moved through her expression briefly, and then she looked back at Mason with the recalibrated distance of someone who has just confirmed a first impression. "Mr. Callaway," she said, extending her hand with the efficiency of a woman who moves through obligatory moments quickly, "we appreciate you making time." "You're here about the rotor housing batch," Mason said. "We are," she glanced at her operations director, a man named Philip, who opened a portfolio and withdrew a single printed page. "The shipment you delivered on the 14th. We've had 3 clients flag dimensional inconsistencies." Mason took the sheet. He read it once. He set it down. "Those measurements are within your contract specification." "They're at the outer edge of tolerance," Philip said. "That's what tolerance means," Mason said, not sharply. "The way someone states a structural fact because the conversation requires it. If you need a tighter window, that's a different agreement." Victoria's voice shifted, not louder but more deliberate, the tone of a person who is accustomed to arriving at the end of a discussion quickly. "What we need," she said, "is assurance that a shop of this size can maintain what it's promising at volume. We've had growing concerns about capacity." The word size sat in the room. Mason looked at her. "The batch was correct," he said. "I'll send you the measurement documentation." Victoria nodded once, the nod of a person who is filing something away rather than accepting it, and said they would be reviewing whether the current arrangement fit their forward supply needs. Philip collected the paper. The assistant, a young woman named Sasha, who had not said a word since entering, glanced once at the stuffed dog on the windowsill and then looked carefully at the wall above Mason's head. They left. Mason stood in the empty shop for a moment after the bell above the door went quiet. Then he went to the back room, sat at the small desk where he did his calculations, and opened the folder he had been building for 8 months. His name was Mason Callaway. He was 41 years old, a single father, and to almost everyone who saw him across the workbench, a competent small shop operator who kept his tools organized and delivered on time. What very few people knew, because Mason had never found a reason to explain himself to people who had not asked, was that he had spent 13 years before the shop as a senior systems engineer at a firm called Vantex Precision, designing automation architecture for industrial manufacturers. He had filed 6 patents in those years. 2 of them were now licensed inside Victoria Crane's own warehouses. He had left Vantex when his wife died. Nadia had been 18 months old. Someone had to be there. He had made that decision with the same completeness he made everything else, without announcement, without resentment, and without forgetting what he knew. And what Mason knew, sitting at his desk on the afternoon Victoria Crane's group left his shop, was something that no one at Meridian Auto Group had yet understood. The West Colby distribution facility, a 12-acre industrial property Meridian had shuttered 11 months ago, was sitting on the open market at a price that reflected what the property looked like from the outside. Mason knew what it looked like from the inside. He had been there 5 years earlier, commissioned to write a systems assessment for Meridian's previous management. He had spent 3 days inside that building and written a detailed report concluding that the infrastructure was structurally sound, the existing automation skeleton was largely recoverable, and that with targeted investment and a modern control system, the facility could operate at 40% greater output than either of Meridian's current active warehouses. The report had been received, forwarded internally, and placed in a drawer. Mason pulled out his phone and called his friend Elise. Elise Okafor had a small investment firm, a direct manner, and an exact understanding of the difference between a business decision and a personal one. She answered on the second ring. "I need to talk to you about a property," Mason said. "The Meridian building," she said. A pause. "How did you know?" "Because you've mentioned it twice in 3 years, and you only mention things twice when you're planning to do something about them. What's the number?" He told her the asking price. Elise was quiet for 4 seconds. "That's low." "I know." "How long to operational?" 16 months. Another pause, longer this time, the sound of someone running a calculation she already knows the answer to. "I'm in," she said. "Call your attorney in the morning." Mason set the phone down and looked across the shop. Nadia's stuffed dog sat on the windowsill in the evening light, one-eyed. Patient, keeping the place safe, the way she had instructed it to. He made dinner, picked her up, listened to her explain at length why Gearhead had protected the shop from an unspecified threat, and read to her until she was asleep. Then he sat at the kitchen table and began. The purchase closed 7 weeks later through a holding company registered under the name Colby Industrial Partners. The filing was public record. The name Mason Callaway did not appear in the initial press paperwork because Mason was listed as managing director of Colby Industrial Partners, which was a corporate name that gave no one at Meridian's offices any particular reason to look twice. Meridian's CFO, a man named Grant, signed the transfer documents in a meeting he had scheduled for 20 minutes and finished in 11. He considered the sale a clean removal of an underperforming asset from a balance sheet that needed tidying before the quarterly report. He went back to his other meetings. Mason went to Colby. If you've been waiting for the part where everything shifts, this is it. Subscribe now so you don't miss what comes next. He walked the entire facility alone on a Tuesday afternoon while Nadia was in school, moving through each section with the focused patience of someone reading a document they had memorized years ago and are now verifying against the original. He checked load-bearing connections, assessed motor housings, tested manual overrides, walked the conduit runs from the main panel to the secondary automation bays. He did not take notes. He did not need to. He revised his timeline by 3 weeks. The facility had aged well in the structural places and poorly in the cosmetic ones, which was the correct way around. Everything that mattered was recoverable. Everything that didn't matter could be replaced for less than he had budgeted. He began hiring the following week, not from job boards. He called people directly, people he knew from the Vantex years, people Walt Garber in the Meridian Supply Network had mentioned in passing conversations over 4 years of working together. He explained the project plainly, what they would build, what the timeline was, what the work would require. He offered fair wages and gave people an honest picture. Among the first 12 people who said yes were 4 former Colby facility workers who had been let go when Meridian shuttered the building. They arrived on the first morning of interior work with their own tools. They knew where every circuit panel was. They knew which loading door stuck in humidity and how to compensate. They showed Mason things about the building that were not in any documentation he had. He thanked them without making a production of it, and they began. While Mason built, Meridian Auto Group entered a quieter kind of trouble. It didn't announce itself dramatically. It arrived the way infrastructure problems always do, in the aggregate. A key fleet client reduced its order by 20% following 2 late shipments. A regional dealership network declined to renew a supply contract, citing what their procurement director described in a letter as concerns about delivery reliability and product consistency. Grant presented these to Victoria in a report that framed each event as an isolated market variable. Victoria accepted the framing because the alternative required asking harder questions about whether the operational cuts she had approved 18 months earlier had damaged something more important than they had saved. They had. The quality issues accumulating across Meridian's active facilities were the result of deferred maintenance and a staffing structure that had been trimmed past the point of operational resilience. The people who would have caught that pattern early had been among the first to go in the restructuring. The people who remained were skilled at reporting upward what leadership wanted to hear. Sasha, Victoria's assistant, was not one of those people. She had been in that role for 3 years and had developed, out of professional necessity, the ability to read the actual shape of a situation from the documents that crossed her desk. She had written a summary 9 months earlier outlining the client feedback pattern she was tracking. Victoria had read it, thanked her, and forwarded it to Grant for review. Sasha had not been included in whatever happened next. She continued watching. In the 14th month after acquisition, Colby Industrial Partners reached what Mason's internal documents called operational status, meaning the facility was running at sustainable volume with consistent quality output. The core product was a category of precision-engineered drivetrain component that required dimensional tolerances most domestic manufacturers could not reliably hold. Mason had designed the production process around his own control architecture, 2 of whose underlying patents he held outright, which meant no licensing fees, no external dependencies, and a cost structure that was considerably cleaner than anything his eventual competitors would be able to match. The first quality report from the initial production run showed a tolerance margin 18% tighter than the industry benchmark. Elise came by the facility on a Thursday afternoon to see it running. She stood at the edge of the production floor for a long time watching the components move through the line. Then she said, "We're going to have a capacity problem." "I know," Mason said. "Not a bad one." "I know. You already planned for it." "Yes." She shook her head slowly. "When did you start planning for this?" Mason thought about it. "About 3 years before I bought the building." The first supply contract came from a fleet management company that had previously been a Meridian client. They had left after the second late shipment, spent 8 months with a less capable alternative, and received a technical brief about Colby Industrial through a contact in the industry. They ordered an evaluation batch. It arrived on the scheduled date, documented to a standard above their internal benchmark, and they sent a contract inquiry 6 days later. Mason's attorney reviewed it, made 2 adjustments, and returned it signed. The relationship was not announced. In precision manufacturing, the deals that held weight were almost never announced. By the 18th month, Colby Industrial had 4 active contracts and a 5th under negotiation with an international commercial vehicle manufacturer that had been searching for a domestic partner capable of meeting specifications that until recently they had been sourcing from overseas. The contract was finalized on a Wednesday morning. Its annual value appeared briefly in a trade publication in a single paragraph that named Colby Industrial Partners and the contract figure and nothing else. Grant Meridian saw the paragraph at his desk before 10 in the morning. He ran the property record search within the hour. The name on the original acquisition filing was Colby Industrial Partners. The managing director listed was Mason Callaway. Grant stared at that name for a long time. Then he opened a separate browser tab and searched Mason Callaway alongside Vantex Precision. 6 patents, 13 years of industrial systems engineering. The Colby Facility Assessment Report, a document he found in Meridian's own archived records, submitted 5 years ago, received, forwarded to the previous VP of Operations, and never acted upon. Grant closed the browser. He did not bring it to Victoria. He spent the remainder of the afternoon reviewing his own role in the Colby disposition process and came to a series of conclusions about what that role had and had not included that were not comfortable to sit with. Sasha found the same information 3 days later through a different path and arrived at a different decision about what to do with it. She waited for a Thursday evening when she and Victoria were both working late, a routine that happened at the end of every month. Victoria was at the conference table with quarterly reports. Sasha placed a folder beside her water glass without comment. Victoria opened it. She read through the pages slowly. The patent filings, the Vantex record, the Colby assessment report with Mason's name on the author line and the original submission date, the property transaction record. She went back to the first page, a professional photograph from an old Vantex profile, and looked at it for a long moment. She recognized the face. She recognized the posture. The man who had stood behind a workbench in an ordered shop with tools hanging in their marked positions, who had told her that the measurement documentation was correct and would be sent, who had not raised his voice, who had not asked for anything, who had simply looked at her with the steady attention of someone observing a situation without judgment. She closed the folder. She did not say anything that evening. She sat with it the way it deserved to be sat with, without shortcutting to the next practical step. Victoria called Mason the following Monday morning. He answered on the second ring. She said her name. A pause not uncomfortable, the pause of a person deciding how to respond rather than whether to. Hello, he said. I'd like to meet, she said. At a time that works for you, I'd prefer to come to the shop. He said Tuesday at 9. She came alone. The shop was the same. Ordered tools, clear benches, the morning light through the window at a flat angle, gearhead on the windowsill, one-eyed, present. Victoria looked at it for a moment and did not look away as quickly as she had the first time. Mason set a coffee in front of her without asking. She wrapped both hands around it. She said what she had come to say without preamble, that she had reviewed his background and understood now what she had not understood before, that she had seen the Colby assessment report with his name on it, that she wanted to discuss a long-term supply arrangement, and that she was prepared to offer terms that reflected what Colby Industrial was actually producing, not what she had previously assumed a shop of that size could produce. Mason listened to all of it. Then he said, I want to say one thing before we talk about the agreement. She met his eyes. The day you came in the first time, I'm not bringing it up to make the room uncomfortable. I'm bringing it up because the shop is real. The work is real. I've never been ashamed of either. He said it the way he said most things, directly, without heat, as a plain fact that required acknowledgement before anything else could be built on top of it. Victoria held his gaze. She did not offer the quick apology that would have ended the moment. I understand that now, she said. I should have understood it then. It was not exactly an apology. It was something more specific than one. It was an honest accounting made directly to the person it was owed to, and they both understood the difference. She slid the folder across the bench. He opened it and read from the first page to the last, with the patience of a man who does not sign anything without knowing what it says. She watched him. The thoroughness was the same quality she had seen in the precision of his shop, the same precision that showed up in the measurement documentation he had sent the day after their first meeting, exactly as he said he would. He turned the last page, set the folder down. One condition, he said, not in this document. She waited. 4 of my current workers were on your Colby payroll before you closed the building. I want it in our correspondence, not legally binding, but on record, that this arrangement exists in part because of what they know, not because it makes a good story, because it's true. Victoria looked at him for a moment. I'll put it in the letter of intent, she said, by name. He nodded. He picked up the pen. The agreement was signed on a Thursday morning in a shop that smelled of metal and clean work, and the particular quiet of a man who knew exactly what he had built and why. Mason set the pen down, closed the folder, and slid it back across the bench. Gearhead watched from the windowsill. At 5 o'clock, Mason picked up Nadia from school. She was wearing her jacket over her backpack and holding a drawing of what she described as a very fast car driven by a dog. Did Gearhead do a good job? He asked. Obviously, she said, the shop is still there. He helped her into the truck. She buckled her own seatbelt with the seriousness of someone performing an important technical task. He started the engine. Dad, she said. Yeah. Is the shop going to get bigger? He looked through the windshield at the road ahead, at the work still to be done and the contracts still to be built, and the long, patient distance between where something begins and where it arrives. It already is, he said. Nadia nodded, satisfied, and looked out the window. The sign above the entrance still read Callaway Fabrication and Supply. It did not need to say anything more than that. It never had. The world had simply taken its time learning to read it correctly. If this story stayed with you, subscribe so you never miss one. Drop a comment below and tell us which moment hit you the hardest. Share this with someone who is building something quietly, without applause, without an audience, and without stopping. We'll see you in the next one. Share.